Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Tonight is Thursday, April 16th, 2020. I think that knowing the day and time, the day and date of the week during these times might be a more important announcement than anything else that we go over tonight. Um, so tonight's structure is that any question you have about siblings, about your child, is welcome. If you're a family member, friend, sibling of a child, a client, a young adult here at Evoke, you're welcome to submit your questions. Even if you're a parent and you want to submit a question as if it's from a grandparent, as if it's from an aunt or an uncle or a friend, a family friend, or a sibling, just submit that question. If there's an age that you're specifically asking for, maybe a 10-year-old sibling, for example, at home, absolutely feel free to submit it as if you're that 10-year-old, and I'll be happy to get to those questions. So Malia, who's moderating tonight, will pass along those questions when it's time. So let me get into a few pre-submitted questions. How can I best help my brother when he gets home? Probably one of the most common questions I get for siblings, from siblings in these broadcasts is this question. And this could be coming from a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle, or a very close family friend. What can I do to best support the individual that's at Evoke that'll be coming home eventually after Evoke? And it's really across the board a very similar answer, and that is introduce yourself and become acquainted with the work. Listen to the podcasts, read the books that he or she is reading, read the books that I've written about wilderness therapy, so you can acquaint yourself with the process. I don't think there's anything you can do to honor the client or student's process during their therapeutic program than to read, learn, acquaint yourself with the work. Going a step beyond that is actually to get into a little bit of your own work. How validating it is when a parent or a family member or a sibling says, I was reading, I was listening, I was studying this thing that I know that you're studying, and it hit me that I had some similar issues or some things to learn in that area. One of my very favorite stories about a sibling goes back several years, and we're talking about young adults at this point. A young adult sibling called me. Their child had previously graduated from the program, and a sister called me asking about her sister in treatment and said she was getting her first visit. She was getting her first visit to visit her sister after several months at Evoke and then at a sober living environment. And they asked the question, they said, what can I do? My parents said I could call you and ask questions. What can I do to prepare myself? Because I don't want to say anything wrong or set my sister back. And what I said to her was, well, first of all, ask your sister this question. In fact, you're welcome to show up to the first visit with your sister actually not knowing. Let her be the teacher. See, in your dynamic in your family, you've always been the successful one, the one that didn't need treatment, the one that wasn't struggling with addiction or mental illness, mental health issues. So how great would it be for your sister for you to show up not knowing, for you to show up as the student, even talking about your nervousness and insecurity around saying the wrong thing, your anxiety. So that was my answer to this young adult woman as she was considering visiting her sister. And her response to me was, I can't do that. I won't do that. Just give me a series of steps and principles that I can follow so I can get it right. And I think this lends itself to a very big discussion for all of us, right? If we have somebody in our family that's struggling, the greatest gift that you can give them is the gift of your work, the gift of you not knowing, you not being the expert. Writing a letter, if it's permitted, to your sibling, your grandchild, and asking them, what can I do to support you? What would you need from me? They might have some answers that I don't have. And while many of them might not be able to articulate it, I can tell you that getting into the work yourself, at least acquainting yourself with it, if not applying it to yourself, is the most generous thing that you can do. And it sets you much more on an equal ground with them instead of this power differential where they're the identified patient and everybody else in their family system is the healthy one. Wonderful, wonderful gift. So I love answering that question. I love getting that question. The next question I get is, what can we do in lieu of parent visits or parent workshops that are temporarily postponed? Now, during COVID, during the pandemic, obviously, we're postponing visits to the field from outsiders. We're trying to limit it as much as possible. And the workshops that we do monthly out in the program are limited at this time. The interesting thing about this question is it actually goes back to when we started our program in 1998, the summer of 1998. There were virtually, maybe, I think universally, no parent visits in the middle of a wilderness therapy program, no phone calls in the middle of a wilderness therapy program, and no on-site parent workshops until graduation, right? Parents would visit at the end to a graduation ceremony and they would take their kids to the next program. And wilderness therapists would pat themselves on the back for the great work they had done with the child, but it wasn't even in the context of some of the earlier triggers for that child, like the parents. I remember one time, my very first student, he was actually came the same day as the another student. So one of my first two students, I remember watching him. He had a nervous tick, and after a few weeks in the wilderness, it was gone. And back then, this was before we opened our program. We weren't having parent visits. We were having parent letters, and that can be very controlled and contained, right? That can be a very slow process, which can be helpful in the early stages of therapy. And when his parents came out to the program, in fact, I remember him saying, "I'm not going to address some of the real difficult things with my parents until I see them in person." And he made the excuse that so many clients make, which is, "I want to wait till we're face to face." And I said to him then, and I've said since then many times, it's not going to be easier face to face. Letter writing is the easiest form of communication that you're going to have, with one small caveat. And that is, when you're writing a letter and you send it off, you can't manage the other person's reaction, right? You surrender and release whatever you've said to them to them. Whereas when we meet each other face to face, we read cues, we take the temperature of the room, and we respond accordingly in a conscious or at least unconscious way to kind of control reactions, control perception, right? So I watched this student, the tick was gone, and his parents came at the end of the program, and immediately the tick returned. The parents hadn't done anything inappropriate. They just basically threw their arms around him and hugged him and were crying with joy to be reunited, and his tick came back immediately. And I remember thinking, that was my first student in wilderness. I remember thinking how important it was that we do a better job at exposing children and parents to each other. So COVID is presenting a particular challenge right now. So what I would encourage you all to do is, it says in your parent portal, what I would encourage it is ask your parent coordinator, no, excuse me, ask your therapist at Evoke, your child's therapist at Evoke, ask them for other opportunities for phone calls and for even FaceTime opportunities while in the field in lieu of visits. And approach it with this mindset. This is very important. It's not about your child earning the privilege of calling you, but be willing to deal with it while it's still a mess. I remember walking by my partner. This was after we had started our program. I remember walking by my partner's office several years ago, and we started parent phone calls from the minute we opened our program. But in those early days, we really looked at a baseline level of behavior, of cooperation before we were going to allow children to talk to their parents. But a year or two into the process, I walked by my partner's office and I heard a child yelling at a parent on speakerphone. He was sitting in his office and the child was talking from a satellite phone in the field, and the parent was at home, and the child was manipulating, punishing, yelling at the parent. And my partner, I stopped at his open door and I listened to this process because it wasn't something I was accustomed to. And my partner was trying to coach the parents and coach the student and trying to get them to communicate. And after 20, 25 minutes, the call ended. And then he started the process with the parents, how it was for them and what were their triggers and what was that like for them? How did they feel? And he started to talk about just ways to respond. And after he hung up the phone, I said, "Tell me about that," because I don't do it that way. I wait till the child, at least I predict that the child is going to respond to the parent respectfully. And he said, "I've just learned that it's better to get them on earlier and to help them deal with the mess in real time. It's helpful for the parents," right? I think it can create a false positive in a way. That's not the right use of the term, but a false positive in a way when we separate them too long. So if you're willing to work it out in the mess, then those earlier phone calls can be extraordinarily valuable. It can even give you some reassurance about where you are in the process, the more you expose yourself to your child. I've done a webinar, so there's a webinar and a podcast on parent calls. So look in our library and find the one with, I think it's letter writing and parent calls. It's a very similar idea when I talk about visits to the field, but that's not going to apply to this time during COVID and the pandemic. But I talk about sometimes we bring you out to the field when the child has achieved a level of success, but sometimes we want to bring you out for the work. And if you come ready to work, if you come ready to work, then you'll probably walk away feeling very fulfilled by the visit. If you come simply ready to celebrate because of the reunion, then you're probably going to walk away disappointed, or you're going to find yourself walking on eggshells or being careful to preserve the idea of a good visit. One last story before I go on to the next question. When we started our program, when we started having parents out to the field more and more regularly, mid-program, a consultant, an education consultant said to me, you're kind of creating an anticlimactic ending to the program. And at first I was defensive and wanted to argue against her, but I realized after a couple of moments that she was absolutely right. And then I thought about it more and I thought, well, that's a good thing, right? There is this false high, this honeymoon that happens if you're away from your child for 8 or 10 weeks and then you get reunited, right? There's naturally going to be this euphoria and excitement with seeing each other in most cases. But the fact of the matter is that's not where the challenge lies, right? The challenge with our children doesn't lie in the joyful moments or the successful moments. It lies in that Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, right? It lies in the everyday. So I said to her on my next phone call with her, I said, we have taken away the climax of the reunion at the end, but I think that's a good thing. And I think it gives parents a more realistic experience and assessment of how they and their child are doing together. So we're going to try to do more phone calls. We're going to try to incorporate some video conferencing when we can to do this, as much as we can. It's not 100% everybody's going to get it at week 3 or 4, but you can ask your therapist about it at Evoke, and then be sure to tell them that you heard this from me, and be sure to tell them also that you're willing for it to be a little bit messy, that you don't have to be protected from the mess of it. And even if the phone call goes quote unquote poorly, the same thing I would say to parent visits often, even if the parent visit goes poorly, we learn something from that experience that we can't learn through kind of psychoeducation and to academic learning about parenting and child rearing. So tell them that you're ready for the mess and that you're looking to work. Somebody asked the question, how will our child get to the next program during the pandemic? There's a couple of different ways. One is we can drop off the child to you if you're going to be transporting the child, right? We don't want you to come to the office. We're limiting visits to the office, but we can drop off the child to you. We'd set a meeting place near the office where we bring the child and give them to you. But in other cases, transporting the child is also okay. If you feel vulnerable, if after all the work that you and they have done, you still feel vulnerable in that kind of experience, transporting the child professionally can be appropriate. If they are in state, Evoke can do it. We can do it ourselves. Just talk to your therapist and help talk about the arrangements that we would make. If they're across state lines, then you can handle a transport company like many of you do on the front end. It's less than ideal in a lot of cases, but I do want to say this. Even when there's not a risk of a pandemic, there still is a percentage of clients and students that get transported. For adolescents, it's 2 transporters, similar to the way that they were often transported to the program. For young adults, it might be just a sober escort or mentor that takes them to the next program. So there still are options, and it's not as far off as you might imagine from the norm. But there are going to be some differences, for sure. And as you all know, in all of your various activities, even something as simple and mundane as a dinner and grocery shopping, you know that things have changed right now for at least the time being. Last question I have that's pre-submitted. In addition to the instructions in the webinar podcast on the hopes and intentions letter, what advice do you have for approaching it? I had to skip, for personal reasons, I skipped the parent support group last night. So I had my daughter cover for me, and she shared with me this question. In fact, the person who asked it might even be on the webinar tonight, and I responded to them the next day. Um, I forgot to do one thing. I forgot to make my co-facilitator a mentor. So I have now made you a mentor or a moderator. Well, yeah, sorry about that. Um, I in the early days, and I wrote a letter about this. If you Google Brad Reedy impact letter, I wrote an open letter, a plea to the field of wilderness therapy and other programs um, around this topic in our early days. And this was an idea that we inherited um, from other programs, and I sensed something was wrong with it early on in my career, but I was young and I was told to just shut up and do what I was told, basically. Um, and then when we started our program, I started to twist it and turn it a little bit, the impact letter. And eventually I was kind of teaching around the title. That's the way that I say it. Until a few years ago, I realized I'm tired of apologizing for what I know to be true about child development. And we changed the impact letter into a hopes and intentions letter. The impact letter, at least the title of the impact letter, it has the idea in its title, that you write to the child and you talk about the impact of the child's behavior on you, the parent or the family or the community or society. And even when you write it in a non-shaming way, there still can be this idea embedded in the impact letter that we know to be absolutely erroneous, which is that the reason that we're sending them here is because of the way that they're impacting everybody else. And the reason that we're sending them to this program or have them at Evoke is because they're responsible for making everybody else feel good. Now, when a child is struggling or lying or stealing or self-harming, whatever it is, of course it's going to have an impact on people that love them. Of course it's going to be disruptive to a home when a child is yelling and throwing tantrums and putting their fist through a wall. Of course, all of that is inherent. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. I'll have to go back and delete that out of the podcast. Um, of course, a child is going to have that, their behavior is going to have that kind of ripple effect. But as we know, in mental health treatment and in child development, we try not to make that the emphasis at all. And so I just thought, what's a more effective, really, in the long run, a more clear and efficient way of talking to a child about why you sent them here? And the thought was, what's my hope for this program? What was my intention in sending you to the program? And you can talk about what was going on, and you're basically outlining it this way: that this is what was going on at home. We didn't think we could give you what you needed at home, so we sent you to this program, to Evoke, in the hopes that you would get what you need, and this is what we hope that you'll need. This is our intention and our hope for what you get out of the program. And I remember when I first shifted the letter from impact letter to hopes and intentions, and I only changed the instructions at the point that I did it only by about 10 or 15%, because like I said, I tried to teach around the hopes and intentions letter by that point. But when I changed it, I got feedback even from my staff and from referring professionals that I was being too soft on the kids. And then I had the opportunity to go out in the field and run a group for several weeks, for a few months, using this new approach. And I found it was absolutely the right thing to do and appropriate. And while it didn't provoke the shame and the guilt and the pain that I think so many people associate and assume is a part of somebody waking up, it was enough. It was enough for me to say, this is what they wanted. This is what they hoped. It was less apt to provoke a defense. It was less likely to cause the child to retreat out of shame, to promise immediately that they would do better. And the intervention and the boundaries inherent in the intervention were enough. And so by now, after doing it for several years, all of our therapists, of course, are on board and everybody gets it. There still is this idea in our culture, maybe even pop psychology sometimes, that you really have to kick somebody in the pants to get them to wake up. But even if that's true, wilderness therapy is enough of a kick in the pants. And so you hold clear, firm boundaries, but you can also show compassion. One need not exclude the other. So the hopes and intentions letter can be clear, but it needn't have shaming messages and it needn't be about you. And I say to children, and I've said this for decades now, after they've read an impact letter or a hopes and intentions letter about how bad they felt. I've said, I get it, but that's not really the point to feel bad. The point is that it doesn't seem like your life is working for you right now. And I understand that you see how this impacted mom and dad, but when you get mad at them 2 weeks after you're home, that motivation will go away. You'll actually want to hurt them because you'll be angry with them. So we have to find something deeper and richer and more authentic and more sustaining than guilt and shame. And really that thing that we tap into is compassion and love. First for the client and then for the family. So in addition to the instructions, in addition to the podcast that I spent an hour on talking about it, I wanted you to hear that from me. And if you want that letter, you're welcome to Google it. Like I said, Brad Reedy and impact letter, and it was posted on something called All Kinds of Therapy. All right, first write-in question of the evening. My teen son is coming home from sober living out of state, and we have discussed our expectations in regards to the shelter-in-place order. He expressed the need to meet people in person in order to complete his amends, regardless of our request to stay home. I don't know how to express my expectations without making him feel that I am not fully supportive in his recovery. A part of me believes that this is an excuse to see his friends. So you don't have to worry about what he thinks or how he interprets it. You just get to have your boundary. You get to say what your boundary is. I have my young adult child is living at my home right now, and she has an apartment across town, 15 minutes, but she wanted to visit, and she has a roommate that works at the hospital. So it's a different context, right? She's not coming home from treatment, and she's not using the excuse of an amends. But my response is, you're welcome to stay in the guest room. Love to have you, but you can't go back and forth. And when you set a boundary, when you finally decide on a boundary after listening to ideas, you don't have to be right. You just get to be you. So that's the shift that I would encourage or invite you, give you permission to make, which is you just get to say, this is my deal. You're going to have to figure out some other way. I just want to say this. This is for you to know, not to say. A lot of the things that I say to you guys are for you to know and not to say, ever, ever, ever. But this is for you. We are all figuring out how to do things that we've never had to do while sheltering in place. So I just want to be clear about that. Don't get into a debate about how he can do it and how, just don't do that. Just say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to figure out some other way. That's going to be our ground rule. And if he's not willing to respect that boundary, you have yourself a boundary problem. Meaning he's not going to respect it when he gets home. You get to set the boundaries to keep yourself safe. To keep yourself safe emotionally, and in this case, medically and physically. And you don't have to be right. In fact, please don't try to be right. And please don't quote me. I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is listening to a therapist or a psychoeducator and then saying, well, Brad says, Dr. Reedy says, this is for you to know so that you can operate from that knowing place. I give you permission, encourage you to take care of yourself, to set your boundary, and tell you you do not have to be right. Someone says, how's visitation going to work during the COVID crisis? There's going to be no visitation. Like, I think I already answered that during the COVID crisis. And it's just the most secure, the most conservative way. If states start to open up and the instructions from the CDC suggest that we can practice social distancing while opening things up more, we may change our approach. But for right now today, and I don't know the end of it, visits are suspended for right now. Any visit to the office, any visit to the field from outsiders, except for the absolute essential personnel. I wish it was different, but I wish a lot of things were different. Somebody says, when can I email my grandson? So I suspect, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I'm curious, if this is from a grandparent who's attending tonight or from a parent who's getting that question or anticipates getting that question from their parents. This is the way that Evoke works in general. We start off with a narrow focus of mom and dad, right? If we start off with a broad focus, it kind of diffuses our energy, our clarity, right? We start off with mom and dad, the usual suspects, if you will. We start off with communication via letters with mom and dad, or any caregivers for that matter. And then we start to expand to the siblings, perhaps, to extended family, to positive, close family friends. Sometimes we even get to friends and girlfriends, boyfriends that aren't considered so positive. If a child makes enough progress, again, we would love to expose them to triggers and temptations while still in our care. So we can expand. We want the mess. We want the mess. And so we're walking this line, this balance between trying to give them an experience that is unique to what they've been going through prior to coming to Evoke, but also not sheltering them so much, not putting them in such a protective cocoon that they don't have to deal with it. So it's person by person. That's a general philosophy, but I have sometimes, and by the way, let me say this. It also depends on how on board the grandparents are with this process. Are they willing to listen to this broadcast, for example? Are they willing to read the book? Are they willing to acquaint themselves with the work, with the communication skills, with what's going on? The more a grandparent or a sibling is invested in that process, the more I'm going to open them up more quickly, right? But even when a grandparent is completely unwilling, they can be put into the mix. But we want to make sure that we're doing it after we've established some clear objectives and work with mom and dad, because it's very easy for a child to take their focus and put it somewhere where they didn't have conflict or difficulty, right? So if grandma and grandpa were always kind of an easy pair to get along with, that was not where the challenge is. I'm going to wait a little while before I'm going to introduce them, because I want mom and dad, if that's been the area of conflict, I want that to be. Sometimes parents, grandparents, and siblings can be involved in the hopes and intentions letter, right? Again, depending upon where the child, the sibling, or the grandparent, or the aunt and uncle, or the close family friend is, how much they've been involved with the client at Evoke, or how willing they are to kind of immerse themselves in this work. It's really case by case. So there's no set answer, but those are kind of the ideas. How close, how far along are we with the primary areas of work, mom and dad? How immersed and willing is the grandparent or other family member or friend willing to kind of acquaint themselves with the work that we're doing here? And then lastly, how far along is the child, so that we're exposing them to challenges that challenge them? And sometimes, by the way, positive letters from loving family members can be as challenging as inappropriate letters, right? Because a positive letter can be as much of a trigger for a child as a letter that's encouraging, right, antisocial behavior, for example. I know I talk to children about this. I keep saying children. I'm thinking young adults and adolescent children, children of parents. But I've talked to clients and students about this in the past, that they want a phone call with a close friend or a girlfriend, boyfriend in between programs. Like it's a privilege that they've earned. And what I've learned and learned to teach and tell parents and their children is, it's not as easy as you think. It's harder than you think. In some ways, wilderness therapy, primary care in general, is going to be the easiest thing that you ever do in your life. In some ways, it's going to be hard and challenging, of course. But in some ways, it's easy because you're protected from temptations and triggers, from influences that might pull you away, from affections that can compromise your focus and determination. Someone asked the question, how do you feel about transporting out of the nomadic experience back into civilization? Transitioning, excuse me. How do you feel about transitioning out of the nomadic experience and back into civilization? It's going to be hard. You know, if it's going to be, the analogy that I always use is it's like juggling balls. If any of you know how to juggle, everybody here can juggle one ball. Most of you could probably juggle two. Some of you can juggle three. Probably very few, if any, can juggle four. I can juggle three balls pretty well. But give me two more balls, I cannot juggle at all. I drop all of the balls. I don't just drop the two that you handed me, I drop all five. And so the protective box, the small box, if you will, to borrow a phrase, of Wilderness Therapy Evoke is just that. It's easier, less exposure, less variables in your life. And so you hand somebody more balls, like all that comes with all that we're dealing with in civilization today specifically, but also in general, there's going to be some regression. That's what happens when we get handed more balls. So again, do your work, do your work, do your work, do as much of this as you can, equip yourself as best as you can, because the challenge is real and it's going to be hard. And for the sake of simplicity, really focus on your regression and relapse and not theirs, right? Really focus on that, regardless of how they come out. If they come out and it's a graceful process, if they come out just hitting the ground running, if they come out the honeymoon and then regress, if they come out really angry and regressing immediately, the real focus is on your skill set and how to cope with it. It's going to be hard. This is not an easy time for those of us who aren't struggling with mental health or addiction, right? So this is going to be a particularly challenging time for everybody. Is there a specific book that my child is reading right now? I don't know for sure, but the two books that we have, and they're very different, are Knight in Rusty Armor. It's if you're an average reader, I consider myself an average reader at best in terms of the speed. It'll take you an hour. I also did a podcast on the Knight in Rusty Armor, and there's also a sequel to it that my therapist wrote 20 years ago. So Knight in Rusty Armor is one book that all of our clients read. It's an expectation that everybody. And the second book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Very different in terms of their level of complexity, of sophistication. So those are the two books that you can kind of put in your reading list. For those of you parents, I wrote the book, so of course I feel this way, and they are lowered to the lowest possible price during the pandemic right now. The Journey of the Heroic Parent First, which is the book that I wrote, which is about my experience as a wilderness therapist and working with families, thousands of families over the 25 years that I've been doing this. So The Journey of the Heroic Parent, available on Amazon. Or the second book, if you've already read that, is The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self, and all of the pictures and the instructions later on the broadcast. But those would be places to start for you too. And those are books that I've written, taking what I've learned from dealing with you guys and your children all these years and tried to put into a book to try to distill into writing what are the lessons that I've learned in this process. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You. Next question. As an extended family member who hasn't had contact with the child for months, where do I begin the conversation when he or she returns home? Questions. Be curious. What would you like from me? What do you need? How was it? What did you learn? What did you learn that you think that this family doesn't know? Is there something that you think that I don't know? Do you have feedback from me if I'm your grandparent, your aunt, your uncle, your sibling? Have I done something in the past that has hurt you? Do you feel like you can tell me the truth, or that I'm going to try to talk you out of it, right? Become curious. Be the student. Let them teach you. I will tell you this. They know more than most of you, at least academically. They might not be able to utilize it all the time, but they have been immersed in a powerful educational experience. So they know a lot. And they would love to be the teacher. Sometimes they can be a little bit obnoxious about it at first, because that's just what we do when we learn something new. We want to be right. We want to weaponize it. So that can happen too. But just be curious. Be curious and ask them questions. Find out what they need and what they want from you. Find out what they want to teach you or share with you, and ask them about what they've learned about the family. Every client who goes to therapy at any age in any program in the United States, a principal idea that they will come away with, if it's any bit successful, is this is how my family's a little bit off. This is how my family's a little bit screwy, a little bit not as enlightened as we would like to think that we are. No family is normal. And it's not a search or a retreat for excuses. It's just real. Every parent is made up of fallible human beings who are trying to do their best and can do better all the time. So good therapy is going to expose you to that. And you're going to come back with some ideas. And if your family is not too defended, they'll listen to that wisdom. And even if you're not right or perfect in your explanation, they'll be open to it. If the defenses are high, then family is going to call you on the carpet, going to tell you how you're not getting it right, going to tell me how you're making yourself a victim and you're blaming. That's what the defense sounds like, right? But the greatest gift that they could offer is they've been to the other side, right? They've touched the shore on the other side. And because of that, they know something that you don't, unless you've done this work yourself. And they have something to tell you about it. That saying that I talk about, that I borrowed from somebody, that says the fish is the last one to discover water, right? The fish doesn't know what water is because the fish doesn't know what not water is. You have to know what not water is to know what water is, right? It's that story that's told by the author. I can't remember his name right now, but it's in my first book, where the older fish is swimming by the two younger fish and says, "How's the water today, boys?" And they swim by, the two young fish swim by, and the one says to the other young fish, he says, "What the hell is water?" Right? When you know not water, then you know water. And so they've experienced not water, and they can tell you a little bit of something about it. That's what a new context shows you, is it illuminates your old context. Next question. My child started yesterday in the quarantine group. Is this the first quarantine group? How will his work? What elements will be the same? What will be different to normal entry? Will my child still get interaction with future group members, a mentor, welcome ceremony, therapist sessions, etc.? Thank you. Great question, and you formed it very well. It will be small. He'll get lots of attention, more than he would numbers wise if he went into a regular group, because it's going to be a couple on a couple, a few staff on a couple of students, a few students. And because of that, he's just going to have more adult interaction. He's also going to have the same staff the entire time, just to keep the quarantine healthy and safe. So that's going to happen also. He's going to have contact with his therapist, but probably not in person. It's going to be through video. So he's going to be doing what you and I are all having to do. He's going to have his Zoom meeting call, if you will, just like all of us are having all the time with all different things. So that's going to be his first contact with the therapist. That's really to protect the rest of the group, right? If the therapist goes out there and interacts or meets or mingles with a child who's just come in and gets infected, then takes that back, it kind of defeats the purpose of having a quarantine group. So it's going to be for the group's protection that we limit it that way. So there's going to be some, I guess what I would say is it's more going to be about higher adult to student ratio in the process. Some of the same assignments, some of the same, it's the exact same assignments, but some of the ceremonies are going to be a little bit not as broad, probably not as exciting as they would be if you walk straight into a group. I think it's a little bit less intimidating, a little bit less scary, and you don't have that positive peer influence right off the bat, which we value so much with the mentors, because we can't bring in mentor students. So I wish I had different answers for these questions, but I'm sure we all wish we had different answers for some of the questions that the pandemic is presenting to us. So we'll do our best, and it's our first one, and so we're going to learn as we go. But yeah, we'll do our very best to try to make it as rich as possible, and just being creative with the way that we do it. How honest should I be with my child's friends, parents, about where he is? That's a great question. I haven't had that one in a long time. I used to get asked it all the time. It's not an easy one to answer. Um, I lean toward transparency, but I've been doing this, and the stigma of mental health and substance abuse, I don't feel it anymore. I don't really care. I know that up and down my block that there are people that are struggling with anxiety and depression and substance use and everything. So I don't have this idea that we are, those of us who struggle with it publicly and overtly, are an other. So I tend to be really transparent with it, but you can set your boundary wherever you want. You don't have to tell everybody everything. If you don't feel safe in your community and your extended family, you're allowed to tell them very little. He's gone away to a school, right? Which we are a school. You can just be vague as you want. You can consider your child's wishes. You can ask them what they want. Um, Sometimes I've had this has happened more than you would imagine. I've had parents say that they're protecting the child, but after drilling down on that some, it's really the parent protecting the parent. And the child can feel that. So you can ask the child and see where they're at because it's partly their story. When my son went to wilderness, I told everybody basically what was going on. And there was a worry that even my son had that, well, when I come home, people are going to think certain things about me. And my response is, they're going to think things that are true in a way. If you were abusing substances prior to going to Evoke, isn't that something that parents should have a right to know if you're coming into their home? So you don't have to tell it's personal. It is personal. I'm telling you what my preference and what my style is. And I've been in this work enough from the client's end as a client. I don't care what people think about it. And I know that people's judgments are really just a fragile defense against their own mental illness and mental health issues, right? So inquire of the child, and you'll find something. This happens the most. Some parents will have the experience that family members and friends will react judgmentally. But you know what that means? They're probably not your people. That's what that means. It's kind of what you learn in this process is that people stop hanging around that aren't your people, and people show up and show up in a powerful way and stick to you that are your people. So it's kind of your way of finding out who your people are, because this is going to change you too, for sure, if you let it, if you allow for it to happen. But more common than that is that parents tell their story when they're ready, and people flock to them. I have a client that I've been working with in my private practice for years who tells the story that they've shared this in their work environment. And every time somebody has any issue with a child, they come to this person, right? They share their story. And I can tell you that happens all the time, more often than not. So it's personal. I can't tell you the right way to do it. Check with your child. My tendency is to be pretty transparent because I don't really care what people think at this point, because I know they're just as human as I am in my family. My 13-year-old is acting. Next question. My 13-year-old is acting or feels like has to act older than his age. How do I deal with him as a grandparent? My 13-year-old is acting or feels like he has to act older than his age. How do I deal with him as a grandparent? Gently. My therapist taught me years ago that we need to leave children their dignity. There's a power difference between parents, grandparents, and children, grandchildren. So you don't have to strip the defense away. And I think we can be tempted or might tend to do that, to think it's helpful. If a child is trying to act older than he or she is, that's a defense. And what is a defense? A defense is something that somebody puts out there to protect them from a perceived threat. So if you come at somebody's defense with a can opener or a chisel or a pickaxe and you call it love, it can be very threatening and confusing to the child. So you set your boundaries, you make yourself a resource, you make yourself safe, but you don't have to strip away the armor. And parents, grandparents, friends, they strip away people's armor and they call it love, and they say it's for that person's benefit, and just not the way that we do it. A great resource is the podcast that I did on motivational interviewing, also the book Motivational Interviewing, which is an incredible amount of research to support the idea that I'm sharing with you, that the best way to help somebody reduce their symptomology or their defenses is to not attack it, but to honor it, understand it, and be curious about it. So honor it, understand it, and get curious about it. Why do they have it? Next question. If my son seems sad but committed to the camp and remorseful, should I assume that he is at a good starting point, or does he need to go through other emotions such as anger? There's no one right way to go through it. Remorse is not as important as you might think. It's a part of it. But it's kind of it's a remorse of self. It's like, it's more about, if I hurt you, if I did something to hurt you, even if it was intentional, I can have remorse about that after I wake up to my own woundedness and after I wake up and start healing. That's a part of the process. But I always say to parents, the problem with your children, I'll just use the example of stealing. The problem is not that your children stole from you. It's the problem is that your child is stealing. I had one of my children's friends who was welcome in our home stole a bunch of money from me on a credit card years ago. And when I figured it out, discovered it, and traced it back and found out who it was, he reached out to me and apologized and felt really embarrassed and really ashamed, and wanted to make it up, wanted to pay me back with interest. And I said, you don't have to pay me back with interest. I'm not requiring that. I'd like to be paid back. And he came over and gave me the money, and I said, and he asked me to be his therapist. And I said, I can't be your therapist. That's not appropriate. And he started apologizing. I said, look, you don't have to do this. I mean, I'm worried that you stole from me, but I don't need something from you. It's not about me. I said, I'm curious what's going on in your life that this is okay. What's this a sign or a symptom of? And I think it could be valuable for you to sort that out, but you don't have to make this about apologizing to me. You don't have to go to a shame place for me to feel better. In fact, shame and guilt are going to get in the way of your recovery. Shame and guilt are going to get in the way of your looking at yourself. It's just the way that it is. That's why the first thing we try to do in treatment is to help a person let go of their shame and guilt so they can get to the heart of the matter, because shame and guilt become not good long-term fuel for change. They're just not. So I don't know what he needs to go through. What he needs to go through is what he needs to go through. What he doesn't need to go through is what anyone else thinks he needs to go through, right? He just needs to be him in his process. So stay curious about it. Keep curious. Your question is great. Stick with it. Next question. I've gotten a glimpse of my child's social media life and I'm angry. How can I deal with this? I can't be healthy. Yeah, I think most of us would feel that way about our children's social media account. Talk to a therapist. Talk to a sponsor. I am a fan of therapy. I believe in it. It sustains me. My entire family goes to therapy, all the way down to my 12-year-old child. She goes regularly and religiously. My adult children go to therapy. My wife goes to therapy. My 18-year-old son goes to therapy, and none of us are in crisis. That's how the same way that we would go and use a trainer, and we have for many years, right? Or a nutritionist, right? Or a teacher. Go to a therapist, find a support group and talk about it. Of course you're going to feel angry and upset and scared. Your children are doing things that anybody would feel angry and scared and upset about. That's just the reality of it. And the trick is not to be unangry or unafraid or unanxious, right? The trick is to sort it out where you can sort it out. So when you do show up to the child, you show up with love and capacity to support them where they need to go. I think I told this the other night. I went to a couples therapy session with my wife, asked her to come to my session. We haven't been into a couples session in 8 years, but something was coming up where I thought it was an old discussion, an old argument. I thought I could use some help. And so I said to my wife, I'll share my session with you this week if you'll come. And she said, I'd love to come. Well, she actually said, I'm a little bit scared, but I'll come. And so I said, okay, but I'm going to need the first 15 minutes to rage with my therapist about you because I was frustrated. And I think it's best that you not be there. So for the first 15 minutes, you stay outside. And when I'm ready, I'll come get you. She said, that's great. Good, works for me. I said, good. So she stayed outside, and I complained and raged at my therapist, to my therapist about my wife, told my twisted, exaggerated version of the story. And after I got that off my chest, I said, I'm ready. And I went out and got my wife and brought her in, and then I could be there for her. And my wife knew what I was doing, and she was on board. That's what we do. We take care of ourselves where we can, not in places where the person is incapable of being there for us. A child is never meant to be, has never been meant to be the container for the parent's emotions. It's a backwards idea in our society that very few people realize, but the child can't contain the parents, can't hold space for the parents. They're inadequate to the job. So you find people that can contain you, therapists, sponsors, trusted friends, spouses, partners, right? Co-parenting partners. Find people that can contain you. So when you show up to the child, it's not about your need getting met. It's about theirs getting met. That's the principal idea here. So don't hear me say, don't be upset or don't be angry, because this stuff is infuriating sometimes and terrifying at times. It's just that you learn to take care of it somewhere else. Someone says, how can extended family best support the child going forward? I think it's the same thing that I've said. Just do your work, become acquainted with it, ask them questions, immerse yourself in it. The podcasts, the books that we suggest, read them. What a great gift and a great way to honor their work. And if you have the courage, start looking at yourself. What a great gift it would be. I remember my grandpa did this actually. I remember when I just finished going to treatment and was visiting with my grandpa, and he was not a very verbal person. He started asking me questions. And I even said to him, I said, Grandpa, it's kind of like, you know how you drink most nights? It's kind of like that. And he was totally humble and open to it. What a great gift to sit on their level, to not be the expert, to not be the guru, to not be the one that knows. The great guru is the one who doesn't know. The great guru is the one who asks questions, that embraces not knowing, that sees eye to eye. Next question, what do the kids understand about the COVID outbreak? They know it exists. They get information, but it doesn't occupy their time. That's not their reality. As students and clients have entered the program and staff brings some of the information in, it just doesn't hit them. I remember I was in the field during 9/11. I had a group during 9/11. And I remember part of it was my own trauma. I wanted to tell the kids about it. And they just weren't interested. Just wasn't their reality. So it's a less anxious environment for them. It's not what they're challenged with. They have the information, but it's not their day-to-day. It's an escape from the anxiety that the rest of us are experiencing and the stress. Somebody asked, will my 9-year-old daughter be able to talk to her 16-year-old brother while he's there? I hope so. Again, the treatment plan can be created and you can ask your therapist at Evoke tough questions. I hope so. It's sometimes the sweetest. My young children talked to my son when he was in Willis, and it's the sweetest, most powerful connection of all sometimes. Even a simple letter can be a powerful way to melt the ice. All right, I have time for one more question. If you don't have time to answer this question, I can call the office. But does insurance usually cover camp just a part of the actual therapy? I did a broadcast on that with a special guest, Joe. So look at our library and look at insurance and listen to that podcast. Joe does a fantastic job of telling you how to get that question answered the best way possible. And I even give resources on there and how you have to be a bulldog for your own cause. So I would refer you to the podcast, the broadcast that I did on insurance and wilderness therapy. All right, folks, that's all the questions for this evening. I know I didn't get to all of them. I'll save them for the next time. And I just want to thank all of you for showing up. It was a good audience tonight. Lots of questions. Let me get to some of the upcoming events. First of all, we've taken our intensives online. So for the foreseeable future, and we're going to continue this actually after the country opens up and we can have visitors. We're going to be doing online intensives for those who can't travel. And during COVID, that means all of us virtually. So our first one is April 24th through 26th, which filled up. May 8th through 10th is, if it's not full, it's going to fill up today or tomorrow. And then we're going to open up a third one later in May. So it's a 2.5 day, it goes over 3 days, a 3-day intensive, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So you don't have to miss a lot of work with travel. It'll be online. I will be running it, the first couple at least, and we'll be doing that. So it's a great way to get yourself into some work. Very small groups. We're doing it in groups of 5 to begin. We might move to 6, but we're doing it in groups of 5. So we're making that available. So contact intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. I'll have the next date up by the time of our next broadcast. We're also doing online parent support groups. So we have an intensive support group for alumni of our intensive program, Wednesday, April 22nd, and then Thursday, May 6th. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information about our online support groups. All of the parent workshops in person, of course, are suspended for now. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, or Families Anonymous. Adult Children is also a great place to go to adultchildren.org is a great place to go to get support. Alateen is for teenagers. Refuge Recovery is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program. And NAMI.org is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is a great place to get local resources, free resources, class, and education at your local chapter. And all of these programs are doing online versions of it right now. You can listen to all of these broadcasts on your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You on Evoke Therapy Podcast. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and search Finding You on Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram. Find @Evoke Therapy on Twitter and Instagram, and find @Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram. Search Evoke Therapy Programs on Facebook. And the Evoke Family Foundation is a foundation founded by parents to help people that can't afford therapy. And of course, our blog has new content. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon. And I've reduced them during the pandemic to the lowest price that Amazon will allow for right now. So the Kindle, for example, for Audacity to Be You is just $2.99, and it's $10.02, a strange bottom price that Amazon allowed. The next topic, I'll decide the next topic in the next day, and I'll send that out to you. I'll have Malia send that out to you. But the next broadcast like this will be Tuesday, April 21st at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll take the questions that I didn't get to. Malia will copy the questions that I didn't get to, and we'll get them on the next broadcast. Have a great evening. Thank you for your investment. Thank you for and on behalf of your children or your family that are at Evoke, for your willingness to learn about this work, to get into it. It makes a big difference for them. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.